He terrorized the streets of London's East End for 3 months in the autumn of 1888. He did this by killing and then butchering 5 women, at least. This brief murder spree earned the killer the granddaddy of all nicknames, Jack the Ripper. According to the legend, he did his killing dressed as a gentleman, wrote taunting letters, and then stopped killing, vanishing into the London fog. More than a century after the crimes, the Ripper's identity is still a mystery, and people are still coming up with suspects.
My theory is that the murders were committed by Robert Stephen Stephenson, who studied black magic.
Walter Sickert had begun his life as an actor, and if you want to suppose that he was Jack the Ripper, he just created the greatest role on earth.
Today, modern investigative techniques are being applied to a 100-year-old mystery. But will they bring us any closer to identifying a killer? Or will Jack the Ripper continue to taunt us from beyond the grave? London, at the start of the 21st century, familiar landmarks stand at the west end of the city, near the Thames River. And less than a mile away, downwind, lies London's East End, where the less affluent live and go about their business. It was on these very streets that a little over a century ago, a killer lurked. In the space of just under 3 months, he murdered at least 5 women. And his habit of carving up his victims afterwards earned him the nickname Jack the Ripper, and the reputation of being the most notorious serial killer of all time. According to most of the experts, the killing spree started on a Friday, August 31st, 1888. The gin houses were open, gathering places for women the newspapers called unfortunates, women who earned a few pennies in return for sexual favors, money they could use for a bed in a flophouse or another glass of beer. One of those women was 42-year-old Mary Ann Nichols, Polly to her friends. We don't know exactly how she spent her last few hours, but wherever she was and whatever she was doing, Polly Nichols was about to walk into history. Here's what we do know. Early Friday morning, a laborer on his way to work discovered the body of a woman, still warm, lying against a wall in Bucks Row. He couldn't tell if she was dead or alive and went off to find a policeman. Moments later, a bobby on patrol also came upon the body and determined that the woman was dead. A doctor was summoned to examine her before she was carted off to the morgue. The examining doctor determined that Polly Nichols had been strangled. Then someone slit her throat and went to work on her with a knife.
He slit me throat twice, from left to right. Then he slashed me abdomen about half a dozen times.
The brutality of the murder shocked the public at the time, and continues to shock us today, when interest in Jack the Ripper seems almost as intense as at the time of the murders.
There are literally more than a dozen books published every year about Jack the Ripper.
One of the reasons for the fascination is that nobody knows who done it. The identity of Jack the Ripper is just as much a mystery today as it was in 1888. A mystery just waiting to be solved.
We have a lot of information about Jack the Ripper, but we have very few verifiable facts. And there's this idea that the person who's going to solve it is that's going to be their little place in history.
Over the years, there have been dozens of suspects, including a prince, Queen Victoria's grandson, Albert, a surgeon to the royal family, William Gull, the author of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, an American con man, Francis Tumblety, a black magic practitioner, Robert Donston Stevenson, and most recently, a famous British artist named Walter Sickert. Crime author Patricia Cornwell is the leading exponent of Sickert as Ripper and has written a best-selling book on her investigation.
It's very strange because as a child, I never even really had heard of Jack the Ripper case. Just you heard the name Jack the Ripper. It was a good Halloween person to dress as, but I knew nothing about the case, never been interested in it.
A chance meeting with a Scotland Yard official named John Grieve spurred her interest in the case.
I started asking him questions, and he said, "Would you like me to drive you around and show you where these cases occurred?" And I said, "Well, sure." So he did that, and at the end of this, I said, "I know there's a lot of suspects in this case and a lot of theories," and I said, "Well, has anybody applied modern science to this case? Because it appears, according to you, there are hundreds of documents that the Ripper allegedly sent to the police." He said, "No, nobody's ever done modern science on this." So I said, "Well, that might be kind of fun to fool around with."
That fooling around turned into an investigation that's lasted years and cost Cornwell a small fortune, some of which she spent on her collection of items from the Ripper era, like the kind of weapon the killer might have used.
One of the theories has always been straight razor. Now, these are some straight razors of the period, so I bought a bunch of these. I don't believe for a minute this is what was used, because here's why. You've got this very sharp edge here, but if you're coming around somebody and gonna cut their throat, and you're applying a lot of pressure, what's this blade gonna do? It's gonna go back like this. And if you're trying to rip through somebody, slashing open their abdomen and getting organs out and doing all this, you've really got to be careful of this unwieldy blade. And there's a very good chance you're frenzied, it's dark, your hand is slippery from blood. I would be shocked if you didn't cut the heck out of yourself.
And Cornwell's choice?
In my opinion, the most likely candidate for the sort of knife Jack the Ripper used was your good old dagger. This gives you a grip, and then you've got this to stop your hand from slipping. And I don't mean to be gruesomely graphic, but if you're, stabbing with this, or if you're cutting and slashing with this, or you're doing someone's throat with this, this is multi-purpose, it's strong, it's double-edged, and you're protecting your own self.
When word got out that Cornwell was going to write a book identifying a national icon as Jack the Ripper, you could almost hear the shrieks of outrage along the Thames.
Well, I may as well have, hung a hornet's nest in my kitchen thinking it was nice decor. And I had the hell stung out of me from every direction you can imagine.
Cornwell wanted to apply modern investigative techniques to an old mystery. Techniques that included forensic psychology and criminal profiling.
Psychological investigation or behavioral investigation cannot tell you who did it, but it can help you draw a picture of what type of person did it and what type of person probably didn't do it. There's no question that murders such as Jack the Ripper, BTK, Ted Bundy, and the rest of them of that type are sexually motivated, compulsive, repetitive, serial killing, where the individual has an inner drive, an inner compulsion to kill, and he eventually does after years of fantasy about it. These are very, very rare crimes, but they've always been around.
No one knows exactly how many people Jack the Ripper killed. But in Ripper lore, the generally accepted number of victims is 5. Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Kelly. Martha Tabram is sometimes listed as the first Ripper victim, but not always. Her body had been found in Whitechapel 3 weeks earlier, dead from multiple stab wounds. And the Victorian press linked her death and another murder committed that spring with the brutal slaying of Polly Nichols.
It was interesting that the first Jack the Ripper murder was already recognized as a serial murder. With Marianne Nichols, there is this sense of fear that there is this escaped lunatic out murdering women in the East End of London.
Or was it, as Patricia Cornwell believes, a 28-year-old German-born artist interested in life's darker side? Eight days after Polly Nichols was brutally slain in London's Whitechapel district, Annie Chapman walked into a backyard on Hanbury Street with Jack the Ripper. He strangled her, lowered her to the ground next to a fence, and slit her throat. Then he began to disembowel her.
He cut out most of my bladder. He cut out my uterus. Then he cut out my vagina and took it away with him.
Annie's body was discovered at 5:30 a.m. by a lodger, and the police were summoned. Witnesses were frightened by the gruesome sight. At the morgue, the body was propped up and a photograph was taken. As news of his latest killing spread, the public demanded an arrest. And they already had their favorite suspects, mostly foreigners, Jews, and neighborhood bullies.
One of the theories was that it was a mad doctor, because why else would you be performing mutilations and removing organs from your victims?
Enter the archetypal figure of Jack the Ripper with his top hat and cape and his Gladstone bag.
The Gladstone bag goes back to a witness report during one of the murders. She thought that she saw a man in the vicinity of one of the murder scenes at the time, and he was carrying a Gladstone bag. A few days later, he actually came forward and identified himself and said, "Listen, I just want to make it clear that I had nothing to do with the murders. I was there at the time, and I was carrying a bag. I am a surgeon." And, the police investigated him and cleared him completely.
So a mistaken eyewitness report turned into the classic Hollywood image of a caped man wearing a top hat, carrying a bag. Meanwhile, Patricia Cornwell thinks the real killer would have watched this entire tabloid invention unfold.
He was watching this whole circus, reading it in the newspapers. Sickert was known to have read up to 10 newspapers a day.
Patricia Cornwell's investigation of Walter Sickert and his alleged connection to the Ripper murders didn't start out as a science project. It started with his paintings and her admittedly unscientific reaction to them.
I got some Sickert art books, and I have to tell you, now again, this is not from an art criticism point of view, just a human being who has an emotional response to things. I looked at some of his artwork, and immediately my hair sort of stood on end. One thing that struck me is that a lot of the artwork, the women in it, who are all grotesque, they look dead.
Although Sickert is known for his landscapes, he also painted pictures with titles like Jack the Ripper's Bedroom or The Camden Town Murder.
Now, this doesn't mean anybody did anything, but that's what got me going.
When he was in his 20s, Sickert's talent as a painter came to the fore. One of his favorite subjects, the places and people of London's East End.
His favorite sitters or models for his artwork were prostitutes. He once made the comment, "You keep the chorus girls, give me the hags." The uglier, the better.
And there was perhaps no better place to find an ugly woman than the streets of Whitechapel, where, as September moved into October, the anonymous Whitechapel killer was about to earn a name. Patricia Cornwell isn't the only one who's written a book about who the Ripper really was. And one former professional thief turned amateur sleuth thinks he struck it big with black magic. In his book, Jack the Ripper's Black Magic Rituals, Ivor Edwards fingers occultist Dr. Robert Donston Stephenson, a.k.a. Donston, as the bloodthirsty Ripper with the perfect alibi.
This is the Whitechapel Road, and we're just walking over to the London Hospital, and this is where Donston admitted himself as a patient just prior to the beginning of the Whitechapel murders.
Donston was a medical doctor with a shady past. He studied black magic in West Africa and India, contracted VD from prostitutes in England, and his wife mysteriously disappeared the year before the Ripper murders took place. In July 1888, complaining of neurasthenia, or chronic fatigue, Donston signed himself into the London hospital, a convenient stone's throw from what would become the scene of the Whitechapel murders.
And it's interesting to note that he placed his profession in the register of that as a journalist.
As a journalist with a reported sleep disorder, Donston could leave the hospital to walk the streets of Whitechapel late at night without raising much suspicion.
And you can see by the location of the hospital, the main road, that it wouldn't be too difficult to come out of the hospital, pick up a prostitute and take her to Woods Dwellings, which is an entryway on the opposite side of the road leading into Bucks Row.
Bucks Row, where Mary Ann Polly Nichols was found slain.
We're standing at the exact spot where the murder of Mary Nichols took place. The victim was lured into the corner. And if I stand here, nobody can see me from either end of Bucks Row.
As we shall see, the black magic theory has more permutations to come. But one of its strengths is that Donston was on the police radar at the time of the murders.
He involved himself in the investigation. He allegedly told people that he had some inside information on who Jack the Ripper was.
Donston must be regarded as perhaps not a viable suspect, but certainly a contemporary suspect. He's not a silly suspect, as some of them are.
Meanwhile, in London's East End, 3 weeks passed without another murder by the unknown assailant the newspapers were still calling the Whitechapel Killer. But all that changed on September 27th, when the Central News Agency received a provocative letter. Dear Boss, it began. Then came a series of taunts and threats. It was signed, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. And so, with one perfect phrase, the legend of the first modern serial killer was born. Over the next several years, the police and press would receive hundreds of letters claiming to be from Jack the Ripper, written in many different kinds of handwriting, on many different kinds of paper, and mailed from many different cities around the country.
The letters are absolutely extraordinary, especially if you look at them in person and not just the photographs. They are not the work of your average person whatsoever.
To Cornwell, the Ripper letters revealed that whoever wrote them was following the murders closely and was compelled to comment on them, traits that appeared to fit Walter Sickert to a T.
He was a letter writer to the point that it was an obsession, writing letters to people and writing letters to the editors of newspapers. He would apologize to his friends and say, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not writing you too often. What, quote, Jack the Ripper does in his letters is he argues in many cases with what is in the news. Clearly this person's reading a lot of news accounts and he's mocking the police, he's threatening to do more. These are not cutesy letters. They're very vile, they're very clever, they're very taunting, they are extremely degrading to the victims. And what you begin to see is even letters that look random and very unskilled, there's something deliberate about everything. What's really horrible is you start admiring this person. You go, God, this is a genius.
Cornwell thought she detected Sickert's hand in many of the Ripper letters, but that still didn't put him at a crime scene. In fact, one of the criticisms leveled at Cornwell's theory is that Sickert wasn't even in London at the time of the murders.
We have reams of evidence. We have several different letters from various sources during September and October of 1888 which place Sickert in France during at least 4 of the 5 murders.
Nobody has shown me a document that proves that, for example, on the night of one of these homicides that we know about, that he absolutely was in some other place. Unless somebody can show me something definitive, there is no document that absolutely places him in France on the exact night that one of these crimes occurred.
Sickert's artwork also offers no definitive evidence as to where he was at the time of the murders. There is a London music hall sketch dated September 29th, but no year is given, which is unfortunate because in Ripper lore, the early hours of September 30th, 1888 is known as the night of the double event. About an hour after midnight, a cart turned into Dutfield's yard, and the pony pulling it spooked. The driver saw a woman's body on the ground and lit a match to make sure it wasn't his wife. It wasn't.
He slit my throat from left to right. He severed my windpipe.
The victim was a prostitute named Liz Stride. She had been dead less than a few minutes when she was found. Her throat had been slit, but that's all.
Her throat was slashed in a way that's somewhat similar to Jack the Ripper, but no mutilations took place. And this is one of the reasons why Elizabeth Stride is not always considered to be a Ripper victim. Some people say it was completely unrelated. It was just a coincidence that she was murdered that night. Others believe that Jack the Ripper was interrupted, that perhaps Louis Diemschutz, who was coming home from a night selling jewelry, actually scared the killer after the throat had been slit, but before the mutilations had taken place. And so the killer ran off, and in theory at least, ran off to Mitre Square, which was about a 15 or 20 minute walk away.
And it was in Mitre Square that the Ripper struck again. Less than an hour after someone slit Liz Stride's throat, someone did the same to Catherine Eddowes. And the slit throat was just the beginning.
He slit my throat, cut out my abdomen, and pulled out my intestines. He sliced through my uterus and left kidney, which he took with him.
Not only was Catherine Eddowes' throat slashed, not only were there abdominal mutilations, were there organs missing, were there innards thrown all over the place, but her face was also marked up and nicked around the eyes and on the cheeks.
What this guy did is he got him from the rear, then got him down, then was ripping through their clothing and doing what I call slash and grab, where he was mutilating the hell out of them and grabbing organs and throwing their intestines out of the way.
The terrible mutilations suffered by Catherine Eddowes were viewed by most people as an escalation of savagery on the part of the unknown killer. But Ivor Edwards thinks they're an indication of something altogether different.
My theory is that the murders were committed by Robert Stephen Stephenson, who studied black magic. We know that in ritual murder, mutilation of the dead is a practice which is performed.
And there may have been something ritualistic about where the killings occurred.
Now, when Donston planned the murders, it's my belief that he planned them on a map. Here we have a period map of Whitechapel.
Edwards has calculated every detail of the map and sums up a striking observation.
The distance from victim number 1 to victim number 2 is 930 yards, using the scale on the map. The distance between victim 2 and victim 4, again, is exactly 930 yards.
Furthermore, the murder sites point roughly east, west, south, and almost north. And if you connect the 4 points, a cross is formed, if we allow for a tiny 63-yard adjustment that would have afforded Donston greater privacy and cover to kill Annie Chapman.
They were sacrifices, and it's well known that sacrifices can be committed at the 4 points of the cross.
Whether or not the slaying of Catherine Eddowes was part of a demonic map-making exercise, or simply the latest demonstration of a serial killer's bloodlust, it turned out to offer investigators past and present an enigmatic sidebar to this most recent murder. It has been the subject of a book, a series of comic books, and a film starring Johnny Depp. It's usually called the Royal Conspiracy Theory, and the case, such as it is, goes like this. Prince Edward, Queen Victoria's grandson, had an affair with a prostitute and got her pregnant. She let 5 fellow prostitutes in on the secret. They had to be silenced. Dr. William Gull, surgeon to the Queen and a Freemason, wielded the knife that kept the secret safe. Once all 5 women were dead, there was no need to kill anyone else, so the Ripper murders stopped. There are any number of problems with the Royal Conspiracy Theory, but that's not surprising, considering its source.
The Royal Conspiracy Theory itself relies on very shaky evidence supplied by a man called Joseph Sickert, who claimed to have been a descendant of Walter Sickert, who himself was a Jack the Ripper suspect.
And Joseph Sickert said that his father, Walter Sickert, had told him the story of what really happened in the Jack the Ripper murders, because his father was involved, not as the murderer, but was involved in knowing what the story was. And Joseph Sickert told the story in detail to Stephen Knight, and Stephen Knight wrote what became a best-selling book describing the story.
Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution was published in the 70s, and a few years later, Joseph Sickert said, I made all that up, it's not really true.
The movie makers love royal conspiracies, Freemasonry, secret rites and everything. It's just a total nonsense, but of course it's the stuff of Hollywood.
So as it turns out, it's likely that the Royal Conspiracy Theory is a Ripper Whopper, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing, except maybe at the box office. With the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes on the same night, the Ripper case became a worldwide sensation.
By this time, the first and second week of November 1888, the Jack the Ripper murders were in every newspaper, not only in London, not only all over the UK, but around the world.
Letters claiming to be from the Ripper continued to show up at newspapers and police stations, including one that arrived with a body part.
It was accompanied by half a human kidney, which the writer obviously claimed came from Catherine Eddowes, whose left kidney had been taken.
Though that particular letter has been lost, hundreds of other letters are being kept in Britain's National Archives, where forensic paper analyst Peter Bauer has had the chance to study them, looking for similarities to Walter Sickert's work. One piece of Ripper correspondence caught Bauer's attention.
This is a Ripper letter, and it has a curious guillotined edge.
A slanted edge, unlike the typical 90-degree angle achieved in most batch cuts.
Looking amongst the Gurney ivory-laid papers used by Sickert, we find the same characteristics.
The same angled edge and the same watermark.
These watermarks are produced by a dandy roll. Now, those watermarks aren't exactly identical, even though they're supposed to be.
And the watermark on the Ripper letter appears to match the watermark on the Sickert letter.
And as you can see, the wide stroke of the N there and the top of this serif on this stroke, they're both angled at a very slight angle. And here we see in one of Sickert's letters, we see the same characteristics at the top of the N.
And Bauer's conclusion?
Every detail of these sheets says to me that they came from the same batch of paper. And the cut tells me that they came from the same quire.
This means that Walter Sickert was writing on paper that came from the same 24-sheet package or quire as 2 of the Ripper letters.
For sure, at least some of these letters were written by the same person, because the likelihood of 2 different people writing letters on paper that came from the same roll from one batch is pretty improbable.
Handwriting analysis was another obvious approach, and for that, Cornwell turned to experts in Tennessee.
Patricia Cornwell was touring Oak Ridge National Laboratory one day when she was in Knoxville, and she saw that I was doing a lot of image analysis work, and she thought we could apply image analysis techniques to help with the handwriting analysis.
So senior research scientist Ralph Dinwiddie joined forces with John Williams, a forensic trainer, to investigate. Williams sees handwriting analysis as a promising new trade tool in the absence of hard evidence.
It's not like DNA analysis, or it's not like a fingerprint comparison where you get absolute positive identification, but it is very close to comparing footwear, tire impressions, things like that, because you have known styles and sampling.
In this case, the known samples are hundreds of handwritten letters. Letters claiming to be from Jack the Ripper, and letters we know Walter Sickert wrote. Dinwiddie and Williams went to work isolating Sickert's recurring character combinations and are comparing them to some of the same formations found in the Ripper samples.
The word "you" in this Sickert document has several unique characteristics. You notice the way the Y is formed. It almost looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top. And you go right into the U, which is a nice little squiggle. If we come over to the Ripper document and look at one of the versions of the word "you" here, again, you see the Y that looks like a sideways S. The O is open at the top, and we go right in at the top to form the squiggle of the U. Very similar characteristics.
Between probably 10 of the Ripper documents, we've made some comparisons with the known Walter Sickert documents, and we see some very good consistencies there. It certainly raises the suspicion of this being the same person.
Though not everyone accepts Cornwell's research results, it seems possible, even likely, that Walter Sickert did in fact write at least some of the Ripper letters. That makes him a prankster with a bit of a morbid streak. But what does Patricia Cornwell think might have made him a killer? In London's East End, the month of October came and went without another killing. So did the first week of November. Then, shortly before noon on November 9th, a man named Thomas Bowyer paid a visit to Mary Kelly's boarding room to collect her overdue rent money. The door was locked, but through a window, Bowyer was confronted by a scene straight out of hell. Mary Kelly was lying on a bed, ripped to pieces.
Her mutilation is unlike anything I have ever seen, either in a photograph or at a crime scene or in the morgue.
He butchered me, just like I was a pig or a rabbit.
He actually skinned approximately 30 or 40% of her body, removed huge chunks of flesh, removed her breasts, removed her organs. He also removed the heart, which was never done for any previous Ripper victim. Her face was almost completely de-skinned. Murder is one thing, but mutilating almost to the point of just completely removing that person's complete identity is something entirely different. And when everyday Londoners were reading about it, it was just, how could one person do this to another human being? It's the ultimate expression of Jack the Ripper's insanity, of this rage against women.
Ivor Edwards has a different take. For him, the murder of Mary Kelly in her room at Miller's Court simply provided Donston the final marker he needed to complete his desecration. After profaning the cross, Donston had taken aim at an ancient Christian symbol called the Vesica Pisces. And once again, it's all about yardages.
The distance between victim 3 to Kelly is again exactly 950 yards.
And if you use a compass to connect the murder sites of Catherine Eddowes, Mary Kelly, the intended site of Annie Chapman, and a point near the site of Polly Nichols, and then apply another arc of the same radius to pass through the site of Elizabeth Stride's murder, you form a Vesica Pisces.
This is not a coincidence. To achieve that, you've got to use a compass and you've got to plan it in advance. This is absolute proof that these murders were premeditated. They weren't done on the spur of the moment.
Edward's occultist interpretation of the basic Ripper facts and lore is certainly ingenious, even elegant. But as with every theory connected to the Ripper case, it's not hard to find skeptics.
Killing individuals in specific locations to send some sort of symbolic message almost never happens. I don't know of one case where it actually happened that was documented.
Well, Ivor's theory, I don't even understand Ivor's theory. Quite honestly.
The problem with this theory is that the Vesica Pisces doesn't exactly work even when applied in the best way. I think one of the murder spots, I think that of Annie Chapman on Hanbury Street, doesn't quite attach itself to that line. The explanation is that, oh, well, you know, if he followed where the line went, it would have been in the middle of the street. He couldn't have committed a murder there, so obviously he moved it just a few steps over.
If you have a number of killings, 5 or 6 killings in a particular area, you could connect dots any way you want and make letters. It could be a K, it could be a J, it could be anything.
But no matter who the killer was, most students of the Ripper case would agree that there was some sexual component to his acts.
In sexual serial murder cases, there's a fusion of sex and aggression so that the aggressive act itself is eroticized. That he wants to arouse himself. He wants to stimulate himself. He's developed, for whatever multiple reasons there are, an arousal pattern where violence and sadism is stimulating.
Today, we know that sexual killers often suffer some traumatic event in childhood, something that shapes the way the sex drive develops. And Cornwell thinks she spotted something in Walter Sickert's childhood that might well qualify as traumatic.
There have been several mentions in biographical works that he had 3 surgeries by the time he was 5 for something called a fistula, which is basically like an abscess or some kind of hole that's not supposed to be there. And it had to have been very serious because the conditions back in those days were so grim and so dangerous. You didn't risk surgery unless it was profoundly important.
Cornwell decided to ask Sickert's nephew about it.
I said to him one day, I've read a number of things about your uncle having a fistula. What was that? And he said, oh, he had a hole in it. He was born with a hole in his penis. And I went, oh. And I thought, that ain't good.
Many historians dispute this version of the story, pointing out that Sickert visited a prominent rectal surgeon for his fistula, not a urologist. But if Cornwell's story is true, the surgeries were probably an attempt to reroute the urethra, a difficult task even today. The 5-year-old patient was possibly awake and conscious throughout the operation, one that would have been easy enough to bungle.
Sickert himself often joked that he came to England to get circumcised. So he obviously was referring to a certain part of his anatomy.
Cornwell believes that Walter Sickert grew to manhood hiding a secret genital deformity, something unspeakable, so that ever since childhood, there was the public Walter Sickert and the private one. And Cornwell believes that in the summer of 1888, the private one took over.
That was the summer that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde opened on the London stage. And it was a sensation on stage and incredibly provocative in terms of getting people to talk about this very thing, about people looking like something they're not or being something they don't look like. Look at Bundy. He's a handsome guy. He cleaned up nice. Jeffrey Dahmer was a handsome guy, that if he were acting relatively normal, he didn't look like the sort who would drill holes in people's heads. That's the thing about human beings. We are not one thing.
2 months before Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde closed, someone picked up Martha Tabram and stabbed her 39 times. Cornwell thinks it was Walter Sickert, unleashing his own Mr. Hyde.
These types of killers, their violence usually escalates. It's like the child who gets tempted to steal the chewing gum at the cash register in the grocery store, and he thinks about it, and he looks at it every time he goes by, and then one day he does it.
It would make a lot of sense to me that Jack the Ripper would start not necessarily by disemboweling her, but by stabbing, getting some degree of comfort with his weapon.
Martha Tabram was last seen with a man in uniform.
We don't know that that was Jack the Ripper, but it was the last person she was seen with, and Sickert did have a fetish for uniforms.
3 weeks later, Polly Nichols had her throat slit, and the mutilation started.
This was the first murder of the series where Jack the Ripper's MO was really sort of on display. Some of her insides, I think part of her intestines, were actually exposed, but no organs were taken away.
Then came Annie Chapman, disemboweled, with some of her organs removed.
Annie Chapman was discovered with these horrible mutilations, and the incision to her throat was so deep that she was very nearly decapitated.
3 weeks later came the double event, where Catherine Eddowes had a kidney removed and her face carved up.
You have this progression of Jack the Ripper's victims, just the violence being committed on them is just increasing, almost exponentially.
And finally, a murder indoors, where the Ripper could take his time and Mary Kelly's heart.
Just killing the victim wasn't enough. He had to go beyond that, and he had to use his knife in a sexual way. He had to stab them multiple times. He had to cut their bodies open. He had to pull their internal organs out. He had to cut her breasts off. And so the behavior is coming from a much deeper source. It's coming from his mind, from his fantasies that he's been thinking about for 10, 15, 20 years.
With the killing of Mary Kelly, the Ripper murders presumably stopped. But Cornwell doesn't think that's what happened.
What your Ripper theorists tend to ignore, and the public ignored, and the police ignored back during the same period, is that torsos began to turn up. And these were not attributed to Jack the Ripper, but if you look at these particular cases, I don't know how you cannot think that perhaps Jack the Ripper might have been responsible.
Cornwell believes that Walter Sickert continued to kill people off and on for the next several years, if not decades. And she plans to keep looking for the hard scientific evidence that would prove it.
As long as science continues to give us new opportunities for revealing truth, as long as new evidence potentially comes in, this will always knock on my door, probably for the rest of my life. And I don't believe that you're an honorable person if you start something you don't finish.
But Cornwell's skeptics aren't persuaded she's even remotely on the right track.
The whole of Patricia Cornwell's case is a house built on sand, unfortunately, because her case solely rests on the fact that some or one of the letters must be genuinely from the killer. In fact, it's very likely every single letter we have, allegedly from Jack the Ripper, is a contemporary hoax. They weren't written by the killer at all.
It's doubtful we'll ever know what really happened during the Ripper's 3-month murder spree, or who the Ripper really was.
I'm not an optimist when it comes to identifying Jack the Ripper.
I've been looking at this case over 40 years. We will never know for sure who Jack the Ripper was.
Patricia Cornwell is only slightly more optimistic.
What ideally could happen is if somewhere in somebody's attic is something that Sickert saved at the time. You find an old bloody rag or a part of a bloody piece of clothing, and you got the DNA from that, and you were able to compare it to one of the victims. That would be hitting gold, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
And while we wait for some miraculous breakthrough, we'll continue to be disturbed and fascinated by what took place in London's East End just over a century ago. We'll wonder if it was Robert Dunstan Stevenson creating a diabolical map, or Walter Sickert acting out some inner rage. Or maybe the truth is a whole lot more humdrum than we'd like to think.
It was probably someone who lived in the East End, had a regular job, had maybe even a family. And if he wasn't suspected at the time, and if he was just an everyday person from the East End, his name is probably lost to history.